get to Tim Walz, who, just when you think no one's sitting at this table, neither she nor the big white blanket, can embarrass themselves any further, he does. She asks him, to her credit, about the carrying the weapons in war, which we know is a lie. He never served in war. He's been stealing valor for quite some time.
Our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, you damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them in, and we're going to execute them.
So, wait, you lost because you weren't woke enough?
Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly gave Tim Walz a brutal roasting that left the governor of Minnesota politically perplexed, thanks to their trademark sarcasm and Megyn Kelly's incisive critique. They exposed the chaos, confusion, and humiliating events that took place under Walz's leadership. From phony press conferences to unsuccessful projects, nothing escapes their merciless scrutiny. It's not just a critique. It's a biting satire that annihilates incompetence. Any plans Walz may have had to bounce back were simply obliterated by this takedown. Look at...
You said you carried weapons in war, but you've never deployed in a war zone. A campaign official of yours said you misspoke. Did you? Well, I'm proud, incredibly proud of my record. He keeps doing this. Equally proud of my service in the classroom. Did I mention I was a teacher and a coach, an assistant coach? Okay, whatever. But he's more stolen valor. In the classroom, I'm in the classroom. My record speaks for itself. It doesn't, actually. You've put a lot of lies into that record that you've been called out on by service personnel. You must clarify, as your campaign had tried to do, and now you appear to be distancing yourself from that clarity.
Greg Gutfeld was grinning before he even spoke a word. That usually meant someone was about to be crushed. And a lucky casualty of Greg's game show of political carnage and mockery this time was Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, a man so committed to mediocrity that he can make bland wallpaper look fascinating.
Here's two pieces of this that are really... I speak like they do. People are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about, and then he goes on to blame it on the school shootings. I guess he was upset about school shootings, so he lied. But stop saying you speak like we do. I speak like regular people. What kind of bullshit is that?
Leaning back like a man preparing for a feast of political farce, Greg went for his beloved carving knife. Sarcasm. Walz wasn't merely a politician. Greg pondered. No, he was a full-time bureaucrat, a part-time logic dodger, and an ambitious master of public confusion. Strong leadership, according to this man, entailed issuing a press release, canceling it, and then claiming the media had read it.
Then Walz also seemed to doubt the validity of the last election and future ones.
They've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada, that show some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah, this one's the core. We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote.
Wait, so Trump is making it more difficult for women to vote?
Without a crystal ball, Begg was able to predict what Tim would do next. He just needed a basic knowledge of how to evade responsibility, smiling as though he were tackling world hunger. If there was a spokesperson for political cowardice, Walz would be well known, carrying a present package and asking for a raise.
Outpouring of love for his son and the relationship between a father and son in that moment was overwhelming too. Yes, even among Republicans. But he wants to dodge the responsibility for his lies, and he brings up his son to do it. He tries.
The greatest hits kept playing in Greg's head. At one point, Tim was trying to explain his economic approach when he unintentionally summarized the plot of a low-budget disaster film. It's not him. It's inflation. The mystery of losing a job is universal. Small businesses shut down faster in November than temporary Halloween businesses. It happened by accident.
I love this. The tampon king gets back in the ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramp.
And Tim Walz really did indeed look like the bumbling knucklehead he said he was.
Greg laughed. It was like watching someone solve problems while wearing a blindfold and juggling chainsaws in a wind tunnel. However, instead of the chainsaws burning, the wind tunnel stood in for his own administration. The man created a sort of art out of chaos. The most popular songs on a Spotify playlist about government failure would be Walz's assertions. Greg's flip-flops during the lockdown are another example. One week it was science. The next it was sentiments. Then there was a new surge. And suddenly Tim was back on camera with his signature look. The same one you see on someone who just walked into the incorrect wedding celebration, but still decided to talk. Tim's steadfast commitment to speaking, without speaking, amazed Greg, avoiding the key questions and answering the ones that no one asked were the goals of every news conference. He didn't alter his direction. With all the grace of a moose, he sailed on roller skates and the phrases. The catchphrases, Greg swore. Walz wrote his campaign speeches on an inspiring cat calendar. Just motivational platitudes that seemed significant until you realized you were cheering a man who merely linked grocery prices to vibes and potholes to climate change. It had no substance and was just fluff.
You're exactly right in the dynamic, and you could tell Walz was unsteady on his feet. Here is part of his very first answer. They kicked off the debate by going to him, and the question was basically as follows: Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, blah, blah, blah. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? And here's Tim Walz.
Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is...
If Walz ever published a memoir, Greg figured it would be titled Leadership in Reverse. How to walk back every decision without looking like you're running. Each chapter would be a masterclass in public avoidance, and each would end with a heartfelt apology to no one in particular. Greg noted that the real source of the hilarity was Tim Walz's frequent re-elections. He explained that the Motons had inadvertently selected a candidate whose managerial style resembled that of a substitute teacher who had forgotten a lesson plan, but they were either too polite or too forgiving to admit it. Greg wasn't alone for this roasting session. Megyn Kelly began the rhetorical assault with the grace and skill of a surgeon wielding a verbal knife. Instead of just condemning Tim, she examined him in depth. Megyn, of course, had a distinct political tone. Greg was a clown with a flamethrower, and Megyn, the prosecution, skillfully crafted a case so compelling that it made Tim look like a guilty contestant on a rigged game show. She had no desire for entertainment. Governor Walz was here to explain why her resume was as impressive as a serviette doodle drawn in a panic. She started by concentrating on schooling, of course. Megyn pointed out that Walz, a former educator, managed one of the most erratic educational systems in the country. The curriculum is confusing. Schools are open and closed, and parents are furious. It seems that a game of darts directed at a chalkboard full of negative ideas served as a model for his teaching method.
I guess hating himself is the first thing he's nailed correctly, because Walz saying old white men suck isn't a political stance. It's his confession. Walz calling people old and white is like Maxine Waters making fun of someone for shopping at Wigs R Us. He wants to execute more DEI policies, and Trump wants to execute murderous gang members. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen.
Parents who dared to seek clarification were also given lectures instead. Walz saw parental anxiety as an infectious threat. Minimize it, limit it, and blame it on misinformation. Megyn raised an eyebrow in response, saying, If parental engagement is dangerous, then Tim must believe bedtime stories are acts of rebellion. Then there was rioting. Indeed, at a time when leadership was most needed, Tim Walz decided to try out for the invisible man position. Megyn noticed that his crisis management strategy during the chaos in Minneapolis was to stand behind a podium, say something hazily understandable, and then vanish like a magician who hasn't studied the handbook. She stressed that the National Guard did not arrive late because they were delayed, but rather because the governor was busy fixing his political optics. God forbid he decides on anything before checking the wind direction on Twitter. Megyn shook her head when she said it wasn't just buildings that were burning. The problem was credibility. Walz had this gift, Megyn observed, the capacity to appear composed in the face of pandemonium, while also quietly being the one who forgot to board up the windows. A museum could display his admirable passive leadership style next to a notice that says, "Warning, may cause confusion and economic decay." His COVID record was her next target. Apart from the restrictions, there are also selective enforcement, exclusions, and inconsistencies. Megyn claimed that although a barbershop was a biohazard under Walz's supervision, a crowded political protest was simply citizens exercising their right to vote. If logic were money, his government would be bankrupt.
You said that you carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of this country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about.
She gave a thorough explanation. Tim Walz did not lead. He performed. He gave instructions in hopes that the rule chosen would be popular enough to create a trend, much like a game show host spinning a wheel of fortune. But being a leader isn't about following crowd. Making decisions is a part of it. Tim Walz also handled decisions like hot potatoes. Toss them around, blame the heat, and maybe someone else will notice. Megyn wasn't done yet. In her speech on economy, she emphasized how Walz's selective closures impacted Minnesota's local businesses, while big box stores thrived. In this rigged game, the dealer was Walz, who feigned not to shuffle cards. Greg came back to tag team the roast, focusing on Walz's obsession with the visuals this time. The governor appears to think that if he smiled widely enough, no one would notice a trail of broken policies behind him. According to Greg, his social media staff worked harder than his real policy team. As if hashtags and filters could solve Minnesota's problems, every press photo was expertly cropped and every tweet was polished.
With Walz, it's hard to even bring him up. He has a resting snitch face. You know? I mean, he forfeited his man card during COVID and the riots. And you're right. And also, at that diner, of course, he left early. So don't you find it weird that for a terrified Politico lingers on candidates' fingers and defend Walz's wide eyes as they claim beards are for bad guys?
He claimed that Walz probably had a war room where they would spend hours debating the best angle for his upcoming announcement before forgetting what it was about. Performance over policy. Theater over reality. It was leadership that was misleading. Greg said that if Walz had been the captain of the Titanic, he would have convened a press conference to address the iceberg's tone. The ship would sink while he tweeted about diversity, hope, and unity. With her usual poise, Megyn closed in toward the end. Tim Walz, she noted, was a master at accepting responsibility without suffering any consequences. Walz kept talking, spinning, and performing in spite of the deterioration of trust. Megyn, after all, said, Tim Walz isn't a leader. He acts as a substitute, a man who fills a space, makes noise, and expects the applause to mask the damage. A governor who confuses everyone with smoke, mirrors, and a little charm. Greg, who never finishes gently, proceeded by saying that as long as Walz remained the leader, they would keep focusing on him because humor doesn't write itself. However, since Tim Walz is currently in office, it might as well
attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter.
4 fundamentals and 2 confusing saying Israel when you meant Iran. Not ideal. May I remind you of Donald Trump's first tweet when she chose him? Thank you. That was just... I mean, he did seem unsteady. And that's the thing, because one of the goals when you get out there, Camille, is to try to project, don't worry, if anything happens at the top, I can do this job. And at no point last night did Tim Walz.
With Tim Walz at the helm, there was still enough material. So all of a sudden the roast was still sizzling. Greg had to put in more effort, leaning forward. He went straight to Walz's latest creation, his climate agenda, like a cat spotting a slow-moving lizard. Environmental stewardship is now commendable, Greg admitted. But under Walz's direction, it was more like a Pinterest board than a rule. Solar panels installed on dilapidated school roofs, electric buses that broke down more often than his talking points, and bike lanes that stretched through neighborhoods where no one rides a bike. Without the functional government and transit, Greg chuckled. Walz was trying to turn Minnesota into a Scandinavian utopia. And then came the cherry on top. To reduce emissions, the main goal was to get locals to mow less. Yes, the revolution in lawns. Greg laughed so hard, he nearly fell out his chair. Skip yard labor, a gang of clipboard warriors thought. Somewhere in a policy bunker was a new secret to rescuing the planet. Meanwhile, the Motons looked at their overgrown lawns and wondered if the weeds could be deducted from their taxes. Furthermore,
the idea that you said that you were in war.
Yeah.
Did you misspeak, as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog.
This took chutzpah.
Megyn picked up the mantle without hesitation. She concentrated on Walz's obsession with polls and task forces. Every issue resulted in a new commission, panel, and group of suit-clad thinkers sitting in a room with no solutions. The government was built on groupthink. Megyn said that Walz loved agreement since it prevented him from ever taking a firm stand. Why risk taking a stand when you can form a committee to decide who is responsible later? She noted that crime rates in Minnesota have been steadily rising while Tim was busy brainstorming slogans and monitoring polls. Walz opted for political yoga, placing himself in any position that wouldn't upset his constituents, rather than openly backing law enforcement or tackling the fundamental issues. Megyn was serious when she called it boneless ambition. Greg nodded in agreement, reminding everyone that Walz had earned his living by being sane despite behaving completely out of character. He asserted that Walz's legacy will not include advancement or change. The outcome will be a favorable news release that will conceal a long-term misunderstanding.